Hello and welcome back, everyone. Now, before we move further to the track session of the summit, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. So, today's sessions are being recorded and you will be able to view them on our YouTube channel. You can find us under the name of Access Development Services. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it further. Secondly, we invite your comments and questions. Please take a look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, you can type it in there and we will hold it for the discussion portion at the end of the session. I welcome you to our first track curated by Development Alternatives on Pathways to Inclusive Entrepreneurship 2030. I would like to welcome Ms. Kanika Verma, AVP and Lead Green and Inclusive Entrepreneurship Development Alternatives Group. Very brief introduction, Ms. Verma leads the Sustainable Enterprise domain of the DA Group. A major segment of her work is on enhancing livelihood security for women in underserved areas of India. She is currently a part of the leadership team incubating Indian Micro Enterprise Development Foundation, which focuses on delivering enterprise support services at scale. She is the co-founder of Systems Play, a platform for fostering collaborations, experimentation, and learning with system innovators. Kanika is passionate about social innovation and system change, and philosophically and practically sees herself building bridges that connect the unique aspirations of potential entrepreneurs to an ecosystem of enabling services. Very warm welcome, Kanika. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kanika. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Parul and the Access team for letting us be part of the Access Livelihood family for the last couple of years, and this year specifically because we've going to be talking about an extremely important and urgent topic that has been part of many conversations, but needs more dialogue, more focus. I think we've been hearing since morning that the significant challenge to job creation and livelihoods has a very important element of inclusivity and equity. And in that spirit, we have organized this particular track where we're trying to get in the two sessions that we've organized to sort of have a discourse on what could be the pathway for inclusive entrepreneurship that actually can lead the way for job creation and dignified livelihoods. And sort of to reiterate or to sort of elaborate further, I will just share a very brief presentation to talk a little bit more about this. So I hope everyone can see my screen. I think since morning, again, we've been talking about that though, we've been sort of growing, the economy's able to sort of bounce back a little bit of the pandemic, the gap that exists between what we call India and Bharat has been increasing. And I share a few data points that might sort of help us understand this a little bit further. While the Indian economy was able to, the GDP was able to come back to 8.4%, the amount of poor has been rapidly increasing. The Indian billionaires were growing richer by 35%, but about 12.2 crore people lost jobs during the COVID lockdown. Further data numbers that reiterate this idea of an exclusive India and an excluded Bharat is reiterated by the fact that we're now the third largest startup ecosystem in the world with 34 unicorn startups, but nearly 35% of MSMEs are considering shutting down their operations in 2021. And while we aim to become a 5 trillion economy by 24-25, the unemployment rates in 2021 remain in double digits for 11 Indian states. And while the 1% of India's population earns 22% of the total national income, the bottom 50% actually just makes 13%. So not only do we have to address this challenge of equitable growth, but we also have to address how at the local level the economic, the economy starts sort of starts building up. And in that light, can we move towards a scenario of where instead of being just job seekers, people actually become job creators? In the Indian employment is complex. It has a big spectrum of being completely unemployed to sporadic unemployment to even disguised unemployment to then sort of start going towards sporadic self-employment. And then there is this whole aspect of entrepreneurship where there is an aspiration to sort of achieve novel ideas and challenging the existing systems of production that we believe could be a pathway towards the movement in the employment. If there are about 40, let's sort of break down the numbers a little bit more. If there are about 40 million unemployed in India and 400 of them are being employed in the informal sector, and in the previous session, I think by Vijay Mahajanji's calculations, he had assumed that 120 million jobs have to be created. Our calculations are coming up to be about 90 million. But these are numbers. I think we're very close and we can keep debating over them. But I think the magnitude of the challenge is somewhere around that. If we were to look at even one micro enterprise or one local business creating 3 jobs and break that number down further, we only need to create about 450 enterprises per block, coming down to only 5 new enterprises per village, which seems like a very doable challenge and can actually sort of help us move people towards the spectrum that they're currently sort of stuck on the left side. So, data at the end of the day is sort of data is data. But what about what are we seeing on ground? What are the stories sort of out there? And I've had the opportunity to sort of talk to a lot of entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs, the ones who sort of trying to make their ends meet on ground after the pandemic. And the stories are absolutely inspiring. One such lady, of course, is Roshani Vegan, who not only in this day and age where we keep talking about market challenges and mobility challenges to women, not only was she able to look particularly at the market side of the business that she ran, but also now aggregates products from 42 women entrepreneurs, and of course also employs four women as well. She's literally created this tribe of entrepreneurs beyond religion, beyond caste, beyond any social groups that anyone belong to. And that's the phenomena of inclusive entrepreneurship that perhaps is the answer to a lot of the challenges that we're talking about, where underrepresented groups, social groups such as youth, women, marginalized, are able to get equitable access to entrepreneurship opportunities so that they can literally become the owners of their lives. And in a way, we are able to transform the way small businesses create jobs and local growth in their economy. Just a brief framework, and I think we're all looking forward to hearing from the panelists today in both the sessions, but a brief framework, and that might sort of help us look at what are the systemic changes that are required to reach the numbers that we're sort of talking about it and have many more Roshani Vegan emerge as leaders. And the first itself, I think, would be the behavior of the system that we're all part of. I think there's a lot of reflection that we have to do as actors in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, where the entrepreneurship ecosystem in general is very emergent. It's very organic, and the entrepreneurs are very strong actors in that ecosystem who sort of engage a lot with the stakeholders in the ecosystem. But the moment we sort of bring down top-down schemes into that ecosystem, we're not only maybe perhaps suppressing entrepreneurship in people, but also doing it more from a subsistence point of view, but not from an opportunity-driven point of view where entrepreneurs are looking for opportunities themselves. So collective transformation for each one of us to work together as actors in this ecosystem, but also giving more space for entrepreneurs to co-create the solutions. I think the second is that perhaps there's a need to move away from enterprise development towards building this entrepreneurial ecosystem, where we're looking at looking more at innovation, fostering innovation in the ecosystem, looking at prototypes in the finance, in the market space that actually creates shifts in the system. And we're able to reach out to entrepreneurs who generally do not have a pathway towards entrepreneurship, and also enhance access to basic information when someone wants to set up a business. And the third, of course, is the policy architecture, where I think, again, we've talked at length today since morning about the informality and the complexity around many of these such entrepreneurs being part of that subsystem. So can we move towards a hybrid transition which enables entrepreneurs to maybe slowly look at a hybrid system of informal, formal? We respond to the dynamic changes that have happened after the post-pandemic, where digitization seems to be a major aspect of running a business, or even at the meso level of policy, how actors can sort of come together, and there's much more empowerment at that particular level. So with that, I'd actually like to leave it to the panelists to sort of talk a little bit more about the subject itself. But just in the spirit of someone like Roshani Vegan, who literally says that since she was a little girl, it took her time because her family was not okay with the idea of her becoming an entrepreneur. But since she was a little girl, she really wanted to be what she calls being the malik of her enterprise, her life, and not working for someone. So what kind of a pathway are we creating for such, for many such women and youth? So thank you so much. I'll just quickly introduce two sessions that are part of the track today. The first one is on micro-entrepreneurship, a post-pandemic outlook. And the second one is on cluster development and sort of building an ecosystem that enables us to build these resilient local economies. We'll kick off with the first panel discussion, which is on future of micro-entrepreneurship. And I'd like to introduce the moderator, Shashtant Patara, who is the CEO of Development Alternatives, an architect by training. Shashtant has been responsible for the last 3 decades in being dogged about letting entrepreneurship emerge as a solution for job creation and livelihoods. He has used many mechanisms, including technology, finance, social innovation mechanisms to enable entrepreneurship at scale. And of course, it's been my privilege to work with him as a mentor and guide for the last 11 years. So, Shashtant, over to you.
Thank you, Kanika. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I hope I'm audible and I'm not picking up an echo from other places in the office right now. A warm welcome to everyone in the audience. Unfortunately, we're still bound by the virtual medium and we cannot engage face to face. It would have been wonderful to do so, but I guess that's something we'll have to work towards in the coming years. I'm also very happy to share with everyone that we have illustrious panel with us. Anish Kumar from Transforming Rural India Foundation, Behrvi Jani, who is in every sense of the word an entrepreneur, and Dr. Chintan Vaishnav, who's dropped off. He's back. Chintan is back, who's currently the mission director of the Atal Innovation Mission. I'll say a few more words about our panel in a little while, but just to set the ball rolling in terms of what we're going to cover in the next hour and 10 or hour and 15 minutes or so, I would like to draw everyone's attention once again to a few of the points that Kanika had made. One, while we might be talking about something which is complex and probably is at an unfathomable scale, when we talk about hundreds or a few, 100 million livelihoods or so, these are scales that have never been dealt with. And yet, with all the complexity and the magnitude at which we see the challenges, if you break it down, you can see that just 3 or 4 or 5 new businesses in rural areas, small towns, could create every year in every village, could create the kind of decent, meaningful work that millions of people need in this country. And the other is, of course, something that we'll dwell upon today, which is what kind of systemic shifts do you need in order to make this change happen? How do you make sure that you're not just addressing the problems that we see at the surface, but are actually going down into the underlying causes and, in a sense, creating systemic change or change that is systemic in nature when we talk about entrepreneurship or job creation. To start with a quick reminder, I hope the technology can help us pull it off. We'll just go to Bundelkhand for a minute and a half or so and listen to what entrepreneur Mr. Mangal Singh Dohre has to say about his business and his vision for economic empowerment in the area. Let's hope this works. Could someone switch the video on?
मेरा नाम मंगल सिंह दोहरे है। मेरा पता ग्राम बहटा, पोस्ट टीसागढ़, डिस्ट्रिक्ट झांसी, इन उत्तर प्रदेश। मैं अपने गांव में ही पहले एक छोटा सा कंप्यूटर रखकर काम करता था, जिसमें मतलब फोटो कॉपी वगैरह है, ये गांव में अवेलेबल सुविधाएं कराता था। लेकिन कुछ समय बाद जब गांव में प्रॉपर फॉर प्रोग्रेस के माध्यम से प्रचार हो रहा था, तो प्रोग्राम कर रहे थे जिसमें मैंने भी भाग ले लिया। उसमें भाग ले लिया तो कौन बनेगा बिजनेस लीडर में मैं मतलब मुझे उसमें चुना गया और उसके माध्यम से मुझे बिजनेस के बारे में, उद्यम बढ़ाने के बारे में समझाया गया, मीटिंग ली गई और मतलब जो जो मुझे डाउट थे मतलब तो उनने वो क्लियर किए। तो उनने ही बताया कि आप मतलब अपना बिजनेस को आगे कैसे बढ़ाएंगे, क्या करेंगे, बढ़ाइए आप, उसमें जो हमारा सहयोग रहेगा सहयोग दिया जाएगा। तो उसके माध्यम से फिर मैंने मतलब अपना क्यूक सेंटर मंडी पर खोला। ग्राहकों को और यहाँ के जो लोग हैं उनको असुविधाएं नहीं होती हैं, क्योंकि वही व्यक्ति जो झांसी जाते थे तो उनका 100 से 200 रुपये किराया लग जाता था, पूरा दिन बर्बाद होता था और उसी किराए में उनका काम यहीं पर हो जाता है। जब मुझे मतलब 50 रुपये कमाना मुश्किल होता था 2-3 साल पहले, लेकिन आज इतना है कि 2 से 3 हज़ार रुपये पर डे मैं वहाँ पे कमाता हूँ। तो काफ़ी सुविधाएं हैं और मेरा मतलब बिजनेस आगे बढ़ता ही जा रहा है और जिसमें मैंने 2 लोगों को और भी रोजगार दिया था जो मेरी अभी दुकान पर काम कर रहे हैं। इतना ही विचार है और भी मतलब जितनी हो उतनी आगे अपन सोच मतलब पॉजिटिव ही रखेंगे।
Wonderful. Just a snippet of what an entrepreneur aspires to do, what an entrepreneur can do, not just for himself or herself, but for people they see not just as customers, but people they see as an integral part of the society around them and their relationship, which is something that we would like to touch upon today. Mangal Singh made a small mention there of something called Kaun Banega Business Leader. And I would, by way of example, like to draw everyone's attention to that. Kaun Banega Business Leader is a reality show of sorts that is, held in parts of Bundelkhand and Eastern UP where some of my colleagues have been active. It's not part of any scheme, it's not part of any program. In fact, it's something that's emerged out of social innovation processes, dialogue, deep listening that took place within the community, the co-creation of something exciting that could actually motivate people to think about setting up new businesses. And then, of course, the model was prototyped, rolled out once, twice, and then keeps happening. To give you a small idea of the kind of potential, in the first time that it was rolled out, Kaun Banega Business Leader, we thought that we'd get something of the order of 70 or 80, maybe 100 applications. In 10 days, in just 20 villages, there were 815 applications from people who wanted to become business leaders. That's the kind of aspiration that we're that probably lies beneath the surface that we need to tap into when we're talking about changing the face of the Indian economy, certainly making it more inclusive. Let's move on now, go straight into the discussion. I'd like to take a minute or two to introduce our panel. We have Anish with us, who's first of all a good friend, but also the co-lead of Transforming Rural India Foundation. Transforming Rural India Foundation seeds solutions. It galvanizes collaborative endeavors such as Bazaar, Samaj and Sarkar to rapidly transform opportunities of empowerment in villages, bringing best practices, solutions, etc. to the fore in all the geographies that they work with. Very closely also with the Government of India in the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, Mission Antyodaya, transforming of aspirational districts program, and so on and so forth. Thank you, Anish, for being with us today. We also have Bhairavi Jani, who, as I mentioned earlier, is an entrepreneur in every sense of the word. Fourth generation leader of her family's businesses. She's also the chairperson and founder of the India Entrepreneurship Foundation, and has taken active interest in various fora in promoting the idea of not just entrepreneurship in itself, but how businesses connect with society. She's a KBF Fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, responsible leader of the BMW World Responsible Leaders Forum, member of the Trilateral Commission, a past national chairman of CII's Young Indians, and has had many awards and recognitions through her illustrious career. Dr. Chintan Vaishnav is someone that we've looked up to over the last decade now. Both in his previous avatar as the academic director of the Tata Center for Design and Technology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Sloan School of Management, and also now as the mission director for the Atal Innovation Mission. Chintan is a systems person. He thinks systems, he tries to build innovative systems. And as a teacher, innovator, and entrepreneur, he has split his time between teaching and research at MIT, and religiously, if I could say so, living and working with rural communities in India to build solutions that overcome the constraints fundamental to improving human conditions. Thank you, Chintan, and thank you, Bhairavi, for being with us here today. We will, in this discussion, look at what's happening post-pandemic, both in terms of the challenges. There are an estimated 20 to 30 million people who have, on account of COVID, been displaced. The most visible form of which has been people moving back from cities into villages. And yet, these kind of challenges also present opportunities. In our work, and I'm sure all of your work, you would have seen how many of these people, having picked up skills, having picked up insights, having made connections with their own resources and ingenuity, have actually built new businesses in the areas that they now are living in. And that's just one facet of what we need to deal with and build for the future going forward in terms of entrepreneurship-led job creation. So we look at those opportunities. We'll also look at how or where innovation is happening and how these pockets of innovation could be taken forward, and also look at what kind of instruments we might be able to unlock. What are the keys that we can turn to accelerate the growth of entrepreneurship, particularly in parts of the economy where it's needed most. I've probably spoken far too much already, and we need to get to our panel now. My apologies for doing that. We just wanted to lay the ground for the discussion that will take place. Anish, could I go to you first? What we'll do is have a quick round of opening remarks from all three panelists of about 5 minutes each. Just your thoughts on, what's vital to this conversation, what's most critical, and what we need to pay attention to. Anish.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Access and DA, for putting this together. This is, by all means, the most important agenda for India 2021 and going forward 2030. I was reflecting on micro enterprises, and I was also reflecting on, how has our policies over the years looked at micro enterprises. So I spent some time looking at the industrial policy of 1948 and later the Kave Committee's report. And both of them talked about protection and production for local consumption. And we know where we landed with that policy intent of protection and production. And in some ways, 80s marked this departure, and we did move to the whole regime of, the IRDP in some ways opened up that space, and which was also guided by Operation Flood. And if you were to look at, I don't know how many lessons we have drawn from IRDP experience, because it was one large program on, micro, and we have definitional issues there. But if we were to look at more smaller enterprises with rural artisans and marginal farmers, so it was one effort at building small business ideas, and it didn't do as well as the policy framers had expected. And later on, with the experience of SIDBI NABARD, again, I don't know how much we have looked at this. So the basic question that comes to my mind is, where are these micro enterprises come from? Some of it, Pat and Kanika, both of you alluded, and actually, the wonderful bite from Bundelkhand showed where these new enterprises will come from. But I see that there is a case for looking at micro in the micro sense of the word. Maybe these days, and these days, because we have now a nano, we can start looking at nano. When we have started any analysis, I see, it keeps looking at firm size as a big indicator for productivity growths. And we know the most of our MSME segment, whatever employment numbers that Kanika shared, it suffers from the same challenge of output, elasticity, low output and elasticity of employment. And if you start looking at, most of them are single worker firms or up to 3 workers, but so our prescriptions are around how do you increase. So, and in many forums, I see that, and that you keep talking about how do you increase the number of workers there. I don't know whether that is the right way to look at it, given the extent of challenge we have. So that is my first, observation, that maybe we need to change the vocabulary and talk more of the erstwhile, cottage. And there is a program, and Pat, you are very closely involved with that. So we start talking of these nano and more, smaller village-based enterprises. Maybe there would be a different way to look at them and look at them in terms of these performance metrics of farm size, productivity, wage, output, employment. So that's my first observation. The second and a thought that comes to my mind is it's not just a change in vocabulary, and you did say there is a missing ecosystem there, but it's also about change in culture. You go to all the villages that we go to, any educated kid is interested in government job. They're not even interested in private sector jobs. And they keep applying after applying to these jobs. So how do we create kind of a mindset which opens them to new opportunities? And willy-nilly, whatever manner you look at it, necessity enterprises, growth enterprises, we will not be able to solve unless we create a more culture which is conducive to accepting this as a rightful pursuit. The enterprise pathways for your own livelihoods. The third, is a very related point. In some ways, when you figured out division of labor as the big creator of wealth of nations, and long back, this is now 1776. So we look at, so inevitably it will lead to increase in whether it is, you call it K-shaped or whatever manner, it is inevitable capital intensity and technology intensity has to happen, and inevitably there will be what you are looking at, Pat, we are looking at, will be marginalized there. So what is the way out? The way out, to my mind, is to change the framework to those global integrated supply chains we have seen post-COVID. Very interesting, low demand, increased prices because supply chains are it has based economic opportunity. What you have to the green, the local, the carbon miles, and maybe those would drive towards a framework of a more rural kind of a enterprise ecosystem to emerge. Today, if I want to be an entrepreneur in a village, I don't know where to go, but I know where to go and apply for a job which is non-existent, or I keep looking at those employment news columns of again non-existent jobs. So maybe we have to create, when you talk of the innovation ecosystem or the enterprise linkage and support ecosystem, we have to centrally place ourselves, and Chintan sir is here, and in some ways the Utter Innovation Lab is looking at something like that, but maybe we need to more deeply look at it, how it can be a catalyst for local economy revival and creation of employment opportunities there, and the yardsticks around that, not the capital incremental curve we keep looking at, evaluating when we look at the micro enterprises. So I'll stop here, but those were some 3 thoughts that I thought would be productive for our conversation today. Thanks, Bent.
Thank you so much, Anish. It's wonderful when you can spell those kind of profound thoughts out in a 1, 2, 3 point kind of manner. Very useful for our discussion. We will look at this question. I think one underlying thought or proposition in what you said was that models are built, models are broken, or models break down. Right, and if we look at the future is certainly going to be much more networked. Whether it's local networks at the scale of a village or cluster of villages, block, etc., or you're looking at supply chains that cut across continents and affect the kind of livelihoods anyone has. Predicting what's the right thing might be difficult, but in terms of being adaptive, in terms of being able to in a very fleet-footed kind of manner put together constellations, it might be something to look at, and hopefully we can come back to that. Bharvi, you're someone who's always maintained, being from a family that's run a business for 130 or 140 years now, managing those businesses yourselves. You've always maintained that businesses don't exist for themselves. The growth of a business is not its only purpose, and that the purpose of a business goes beyond the enterprise itself, and that there's a very strong connect between business and society, a two-way connect. But in terms of today's discussion, if we are looking at how we can rebuild, how we can reimagine, and bring much more livelihood security into the lives of 80 or 90 million people through entrepreneurship, what do you think would be, again, the major concerns? What should we be guided by, and what should we work towards? If you could share your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And Anisha, I think so many of your points, spoke to my heart. I grew up in an urban city. I live in a village now in the far off in Himalayas, and so I can see where the gaps are. But let me sort of take a few steps back and talk about the fact that, what we understand to be the system is completely shifting. And therefore, I think to go and apply tried and tested methods may not bode us well. More importantly, we don't have much time, because in about 8 years, we're going to have 1 billion people, a working age group. And so, we're looking at a very short amount of time, which means speed is of essence. And we're also looking at a large, complex, problem statement, if you will. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about, first of all, a couple of things which kind of are driving the systemic shift. One is, of course, the nature of job itself. Technology, networks, digitization, a lot of these aspects, including fourth industrial revolution technologies, are changing the nature of job. First, maybe for urban population, but also eventually for rural population, because rural population tends to migrate also a lot. We've seen some of that reverse because of the pandemic, but if you go and talk to younger people in a village like where I live, the first option is always to just get out of here. And I think first and foremost, we have to understand, why does that get out of here happens? In 2014, I went with a friend who was an indologist and a rally driver friend, and drove about 18,000 kilometers across the country with this precise question, asking people that, how do you make your livelihood choices? Because I think they've never truly understood the thinking that goes behind in approaching a livelihood choice. I think once we understand the different parameters of that, we used to think just 5 years ago, stability, 5 years ago, the respect, the position mattered a lot to a lot of rural youth. That has gone out of the window. They don't care. They want to make sure that there is growth, and they want to make sure that there is opportunity for learning, there is flexibility. I mean, some of these preferences have shifted so quickly that you cannot even imagine. And it's not just in men, it's also in women. And I think we're missing some of these shifts when we don't ask our young people that, why do you want to do what you want to do? And there is no system at the school level, at the college level in rural India to guide them. I ran a small workshop last year in our local inter-college here. It has some 150 kids who come from nearby villages. And, they had never heard of career counseling. We have a college in a rural area in Himalayas running a class on history and political science. Why isn't it running on agriculture management? And why is it not running on, computer science? And why are we not even giving these options to our rural young is a question I have. And I think in that we are not spending the time to understand how they have shifted. And I think that's very, very important, because they no more see themselves as beneficiary of a system. They see themselves as partners and contributors of the system. And we've got to create systems that help them do that. So when you look at, for example, entrepreneurship, it's a great way for a lot of rural young to say, okay, I count, I can make a difference. And I think that's the shift we need to see, right? The second, kind of the shift that is happening in the world is the agency of the individual has significantly increased. Today you have it gotten so particularized that one person sitting in a corner somewhere can reach a market somewhere else. And this is possible. I have rural women who ship using India Post to bigger cities, and from there it manages to go to cities in Europe. So I don't think this idea that we have, and Manish would, what you referred to, there's a supply chain shift, and that shift is not just about, the kind of things we do in my business, which is the connections and the logistics of all of it, but it is really about that the individual agency has increased, the willingness for it has increased, the capacity for it has increased. And so we have to ask, what can we do to allow the individual agency to materialize where it also benefits the community in which it is anchored? And that's what, that's where my third point comes, and you refer to it. I mean, my father would always tell me, when I would ask him that what is the purpose of business? Is it only money? And he would say, no, he would say it is the collective trusteeship of society. And as some of what we call are the traditional industrialized jobs moving to machines, and whether we like it or not, they will in the next 30 years. It is our responsibility to educate, to make aware of our people that, look, there is another opportunity that you're missing. You're missing the point that your little block in a far off state somewhere needs a garbage collection venture, right? You're missing the opportunity that there is a 2,000 student population whom you could train and scale by running a skilling venture. Or you could just run a small cafe, or you could run a small pastry. A year ago, in the middle of a pandemic, I ended up going to the market. It was about 60 shops. It's a very small little, the population of our cluster of villages is 8,000. And I met this young man who had started a cake and pastry shop. And I asked him, I said, what made you start a shop in the middle of a pandemic? And he said, I came back. I was working in Noida. I lost my job. I was working as a cleaner in an office building. So I came back. But, when I was working there, my interest was in, I used to see a lot of people like to eat these cakes and pastries and all. But, when I came back, I realized that our little town has only one person who makes it, and it wasn't really great. So he showed 5 women. 5 women or about 40 videos of how to make cake, bought himself 2 ovens from his savings, and created a cake and pastry shop. I mean, the guy even bakes now a Black Forest cake. So what I'm trying to say is that we underestimate the ability of our people to gauge opportunity. And it's only when we think that we say, "Arey, gaon mein kaun cake khata hai?" Aisa nahi hai. I think this divisions we have, us urban, them rural, this global, this local, are all out of the window now in the mind of the person. The restrictions, the physical restrictions, the systemic restrictions, the impediments may still exist, but they exist because system shapers haven't understood, and in the mind of the person, they have gone. And if we realize that gap, then the problem becomes even scarier, because then the aspirations have become so high that the system is going to have a real strenuous catch up to do with those. And that's why we need to get into actual understanding of what shifts, what enterprises people are doing, and why they want to do. And I think at the end of the day, if we can give them ideas locally about marrying purpose with profit, in my drive, and even though it was 7 years ago, I can tell you when I met people, they said, I'd rather live at home than go somewhere else, because my savings are wiped out when I live in a city. I'm away from my home. One trip back, I lose my complete savings. So I'd rather be even 1 hour away from my home is fine, but I'd rather be closer to my home. And that is what thousands of people told me through those 51 days. I drove everywhere across the world. So I think what I want to tell you is that we need to change our mindset about where this is going. Once we change that, then our ability to understand what is needed will significantly improve. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ravi. In work that we've done over the last 3 or 4 years, Development Alternatives itself, and then in partnership with Pradhan, with Transforming Rural India, what's been remarkable, I think, is the stunning degree of diversity in terms of kinds of businesses that people have set up. It really is a dazzling array, and 80% of those, are businesses that we wouldn't normally have thought of as being, not just possible but also viable in the rural economy. I would like to, at some point, across all panelists, come back to the point you made about agency. And how we might be able to activate individual agency, because that in a sense is what the ecosystem needs to do. Not that people should be left to their own devices, because they will, and many of them will sort of battle through and fulfill those aspirations, but how can we make it much more easier so that people are on the threshold of crossing the entrepreneurship barrier, are able to do so. Entrepreneurship, of course, not being an end in itself, as both of you have already pointed out. It's a means to something for that person, and of course for society. Chintan, sorry to keep you waiting. I was encouraged by the note taking, because I know that you're a person who maps systems and has an uncanny ability to make sense of systems. But if we, combine that with all the work that you've done on innovation, then is there some way of making sense of the challenge, that we have at hand, that existed 2 years ago and has probably become even more severe now in terms of being a challenge of livelihoods, of, creating the enterprises that could help create those kind of jobs? But also in terms of, our ability to recognize the opportunities, where we talked about the shifts that are taking place, to be able to recognize those and seize the moment, or if not the moment, within the next decade, to do what needs to be done to make sure we have a much more inclusive, much more robust economy. Over to you, Chintan. You'll have to unmute yourself, Chintan.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Very good. Very good. And the network here is a little shaky today, so just in case. But I think a lot of wisdom has been shared already by Anish, and let's see. The second speaker's name I didn't write. Bhairavi. Right.
Chintan, is your video on?
So
because the audio is a bit choppy, so if you
I believe it's a lot of
yeah. This might just be better.
Shall we also put up our videos? No.
If I were to ask myself a question, that what are some of the best barriers to creating an innovation, a culture of innovation,
I might. Yeah, Chintan, it's still a little difficult. Is there a sort of different place in the room? Okay, we've lost him now. Let's hope Chintan can join the conversation uh, soon. Anish, I know you might have to leave a little early, but please do try and stay as long as you can.
Yes.
And in case you do, then we're very fortunate to have Aliva with us, who's been working closely with Anish on several of the Transforming Rural India Foundation initiatives. Welcome, Aliva. Thanks for being with us. We will try and get through to Chintan if the team could start making calls right now and figuring out how we can reconnect him. Let's do that. I would like to, for the next maybe 10 minutes. Yeah.
Now?
Yes, you are. Thank you so much. Good to have you back.
I think. Yes. Okay. Let's try. Let's keep going.
Yeah, this is much better. And Chintan, you might as well start from scratch because it was a little choppy in the beginning as well.
I see. Okay. Okay. All right. Let me know if you need me to turn off my video at any point. But I agree with much of what Anish and Bhairavi said. If I were to ask myself the same question as to what are some of the biggest barriers to creating a strong culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. Pat, am I coming through?
Yes, you are, Chintan. Please go ahead.
If one were to ask, what are some of the deepest sort of barriers to creating a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship? I would say I would arrive at some similar, in a way, if I could call them chasms. It is useful, it is delightful to find a family that trusts their child to do entrepreneurship over other professions. It's delightful to find a business person who believes that an academic can be entrepreneurial. It's similarly refreshing to find an academic who believes that a business person may have appreciation for depth and rigor. Similarly, very nice to find somebody in public sector who believes that large problems will require working together with private sectors. Similarly, somebody in private sector who believes that there can be people entrepreneurial in public sector as well. And similarly, between for-profit and not-for-profit. From the systems perspective, it is like saying, for instance, I don't remember ever saying that I don't like my right hand's index finger. That doesn't make sense because it's a component of a system. So all of these are components of a single system that we're trying to create. So these types of divisions are not very useful, to say the least. I think let me come to another point, which sort of we alluded to, Kanika alluded to as we got started, which relates to all of this, and that is this is the question that I am most often contending with these days, having gone from being an academic at MIT to currently serving as the mission director of Atal Innovation Mission. Many of you know that Atal Innovation Mission's job is to create and nurture a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, or create an ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurship. And so many of the failures and to whatever extent successes that we are talking about in that realm, Atal Innovation Mission has a role to play in that. And one of the hardest questions that I don't yet have a great handle on. I have done some work in it, and I have some understanding of it, but I don't have all the answers. Maybe I will never have all the answers. But this is the question of where does the top-down initiatives meet the bottom-up initiatives? Or maybe I can ask it slightly differently. How can we create top-down initiatives and bottom-up initiatives such that they can work together effectively? Or maybe I can ask the same question slightly differently also. What has to happen at the interface of top-down initiatives and bottom-up initiatives, right? And I'll give you a quick concrete example, so we're not talking in abstract about this thing. But imagine, so imagine the solar-powered access to solar-based, solar-powered innovations in rural India, right? You can think of this as a, there are at least two parts to this. One way to do it is a top-down method of creating microgrids, where you build these rural microgrids, and you take care of things like equity and capacity and all of that in your design. And as the government, or even as a private sector with a lot of, that has a lot of money, can come in and build these microgrids. It's a top-down method, right? The other way to do it is to say, I'm going to build a bottom-up approach. So I'm going to build a one solar power installation at a time, household-based, from entrepreneur to entrepreneur. They're going to use this solar power for whatever it is that they do. Maybe they do tailoring, they do, some other agricultural work that needs power and so on, irrigation, whatever. But I'm going to build it bottom up, one instance at a time, right? And you ask a question, what are the pros and cons of these two approaches? And one way to think about it is that, for instance, there are certain things that are easier for the top-down approach. For example, if you're a private sector, large private sector entity, influencing the government, you have the resources, is easier. Providing deep discounts to people initially for adoption and all that is easier. Raising investments through your other networks is easier. This is a much better done if you were a large private sector company. There are several things that both top-down and bottom-up initiatives can do roughly equally well, or at least if they have the intention, there's a way to do it. They can build such infrastructure. Both are possible. Oftentimes, this is just the applications may be narrow in the sense that they can both provide narrow applications, like I will light your light bulb, or I will charge your cell phone, or whatever. Both of them can do that. They can both do service and maintenance, top down, bottom up. They can unlock finance, link with existing government schemes. They can even be, if they are conscientious, even the top-down scheme can be very inclusive, even if it's a private scheme, if that's what you want to do. You can provide loan guarantees, you can provide gap supports, all of this. There's nothing in theory that prevents a top-down versus a bottom-up approach from achieving all of these things, right? There are some things that are difficult for both, whether you are a top-down scheme or a bottom-up scheme. These things are winning government tenders is difficult for both. And secondly, creating certification that is broadly agreed upon and all vendors kind of adhere to that standard and certification and all of that, that's difficult, whether you are a large top-down or even large bottom-up, hard things to do. Now, there is the fourth quadrant, right? This is where the bottom-up excels. In this particular example, if you're providing energy access, then you can certainly expect that once you provide somebody a plug, they're going to plug in more and more things into it. So it's not about providing a fixed quantity of energy to them, but it is about providing, catering to their increasing need for energy and having a way for them to pay for that increasing need for energy. And one way for them to do that is only if they can, their entrepreneurial journeys get better by using solar power in this example, and they can sell something better, have more. That, seems to happen better in bottom up because this person owns the infrastructure. Whereas in a top-down fashion, you would have owned the infrastructure, the central entity would have owned the infrastructure and would not have worried about whether this person is making more money or not. A car dealer that comes to my home will sell me a car, but doesn't really care whether I have a church to drive to, I have a playground to drive to, whatever, only I care for. And so in other words, there are pros and cons here. But what seems to break is that the infrastructure creation and the coming together of this top-down infrastructure creation versus bottom-up ecosystem that's coming up. Where do they meet? So let me come to now Atal Innovation Mission. So Atal Innovation.
Oops. Chintan, are you there?
Atal Innovation Mission has created and so forth. Access to at least somebody. Now, this may not be the somebody one may be focused on, but somebody's getting access.
Chintan, we're losing you again. You might just have to be very brief. Yeah. Am I audible to everyone else? Yeah, great. Okay. We'll get back to Chintan for that piece on how the Atal Innovation Mission is trying to address some of the challenges. I think we've lost him once again. I would like to connect virtually the first thing that Anish, you had mentioned. Our understanding of firm size or the significance of firm size and the extent to which we need to grow the business or grow businesses in order for them to become more employment intensive, with something that Chintan had mentioned at the end, which is this interface between the top initiatives that are led from the top, either because of responsibility that governments might have or business interests that large corporations might have. Do we see the possibility of programs and schemes taking the shape of taking a shape which is more that of a platform on which let's say it's like a garden, where many plants can flourish, instead of program schemes, etc., which are very directive in nature, which prescribe or prescriptive in nature, where from the top people are told what they can do, what they can't do. Is it possible to create platforms, create ecosystems? Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's something, and Pat, you have been at it for such a long time, and it is something, and net it adds to our collective efficiencies. Otherwise, we are duplicating, and so many things are superfluous. Unfortunately, the kind of trust deficits we have all around, what Chintan was saying early on, that it would be great to find a bureaucrat like that, or an NGO like that, or a business like that. So that's essential challenge is in our society with low trust deficits. We have a very interesting problem. This is something all of us accept, understand that needs to be done, but very few such opportunities have shaped up. I'll tell from my experience with working with the Rural Development Ministry, which sees itself actually like a platform ministry. And they never articulate it like that, but as you speak, so they have been for the last year and a half entering into multiple partnerships with different line departments, right from MOFP or to Tribal Welfare, MOTA, or Agriculture Department, Agriculture Ministry, and looking at how they can solve their last mile challenge. They have built their own program, very interestingly called Startup Village Entrepreneurship Program. You are engaged with it, and the program is in some ways very interestingly structured. But governments have, faith in themselves to deliver what is required, and also have, a healthy skepticism, particularly when you look at, small or poor people, but not so much for say a big deal, and private sector is most welcome, but for the small private sector is challenged. So how do we create that space would be there is a program called Public Private Partnership for Intensive Agriculture Development, which is a Ministry of Agriculture Development Agriculture Ministry program, which has worked very well. And there are what's and all, and in anything that the government does, you will find. Similarly, I see that with the National Rural Economic Transformation Project, which is a World Bank assisted project, again, ministry is looking to build in partnerships with private sector in a formal way. They're inviting private sector to come and do what Chintan was saying, ministry to provide that interface where you disintermediate both the bottom up and the top down in a manner in which you are able to increase productivity and productive outcomes there. So ministry is looking at those programs, and I see there is a increased aspiration and efforts around it. Maybe that is one area where the collective that DA is leading could look at, how do we create such opportunities for different sets of people to come and contribute with their differential and very unique value adds. This is one conversation I had long back with where I said that let's look at the ground and let's see if we could come in. So, and in some ways, if we look at the terra firma is the platform. You see, end of the day, and everything has to go there. So if we start looking at some innovation is required in that space, and maybe this conversation should lead to building that kind of approach.
Yeah, one of the things that's sort of jumping out, from many of the comments that have been made is that when we think of entrepreneurship, or more specifically when we think of enterprise development programs, the presumption that we're making is that people are weak, right? That the person who becomes an entrepreneur lacks capacity, they're weak, and therefore a certain amount of resources, capacity building measures, so on and so forth, have to be directed at that person. Bhairavi, I'd just like to come to you because you did make mention of this. What will it take for the ecosystem to start recognizing strengths? To see that the strength lies within people and to a much greater extent than we normally think.
Well, it's the same thing as thinking of farmers as burden. It's ridiculous. I mean, try and grow something in a pot. Forget the farm, and you will know that there is nothing vulnerable about that. They are vulnerable because the system that has put them, to follow certain rules have increased their vulnerability. I think we have to be very clear about the fact that if we keep looking at what is our biggest strength, I mean, India has the second largest arable land in the world. We are in 80% of produce grown in the world. We're the top 5 producers. Now, when you think of it, you understand the enterprise of the Indian farmer, because they have been in a system which is very vicious. If you think of at least 78% of the smallholder farmers. So at the end of the day, if you look at everything that is supposed to be your strength as your economic burden, right, then you are going to suffer big time because you are not looking at the strength on the table. It's the same thing with entrepreneurship. I mean, it creates jobs, it brings in a new way of thinking, but you keep thinking, how do I help this entrepreneur? In Hindi, if I can say, iska udhar kaise karenge? Who are you to think like that? I mean, out of your mind. There are many entrepreneurship conversations that I sit on where policymakers and politicians and legislators will come with an attitude saying, we can help them rise, and they need our help. And I'm like, you only think that they need your help because they're your new vote bank. But you're not really interested, because otherwise you would not be putting a question out there like that, because you would know what it takes to have an idea and give it a form. It's so tough. It's so tough that you wouldn't, and it's not just about the system that is around you, but it's about your own self-belief and the kind of social conditioning around this in our society, which has been really dismal until recently. I mean, thank God for the Facebooks of the world and the WhatsApp systems where, people share ideas and people share, you have to live in a rural context to understand what that means. But at the end of the day, I think when we think of a system, and that system has to have the individual at the center of it. You cannot think of a system in terms of group rights anymore. People only resort to group rights when individual rights are compromised. And I think so we have to understand, that's what I keep saying, we don't have a better time than it has ever been to augment that individual agency. And the first step of doing that is to say that the individual is at the center of this, whether it's rural development, whether it's agriculture, whether it is tribal affairs. We want to box people. You're a rural woman, you are a rural man of tribal background, you're an SC. We're so easy to group people. You talk about agricultural reforms. I live in a place where if I go to the horticulture department here, they distribute seeds based on caste. And since the ST are in larger number in my area, as a general category, I get mooli ka beej, which doesn't have much yield. So I'm trying to explain to you that, all great things are fine and the thoughts in Delhi. And I have been there also. But I think there is so much disconnect in our dissemination system in terms of respecting the citizen as a consumer, as your customer, as your partner, as your strength to achieve your targets, your development. Once in a while, as Chintan was saying, you will find these amazing officers, sometimes junior, sometimes senior, who will be in our administration system. But those are rare. And why is that rare? That's the question. That means somewhere the system is failing. And I don't think you have a generation today that is going to be as patient with a failing system as the previous generations were. That is something that we must know is the biggest risk we face as a country today.
Yeah. On that note, of disconnect, Chintan, I'm going to check again to see whether we're connected. Can you hear what we're saying?
Yes.
Wonderful.
I can hear you. Can you hear
Wonderful.
me?
Wonderful. And in addition to anything else you might wanted to add, I just wanted to carry forward that point about the disconnect between institution and individual. Government, of course, being the most significant of institutions. But do you see any way in which that can break down, where entrepreneurship is something that does need to be dealt with by institutions, cannot be so institutionalized in its approaches, and can actually be more nurturing or allow more freedom of action?
Yeah, can you ask the very last part of what you were saying?
I was just wondering whether, as a body of government, for example, the Atal Innovation Mission needs
entrepreneurship. Really? Yeah. Go ahead.
It was whether we can break out of institutional constraints when we're talking about entrepreneurship ecosystems. The Atal Innovation Mission works largely with institutions, right? So,
yes. Well, no, I think let me reframe your question a bit.
sure.
The question is, when can we break out of the institutional context? When we will be able to break out of the institutional context? And I think we will be able to, well, I mean, this really takes us to Ronald Coase, doesn't it? It's really, we're asking a question, why do we need an institution? And I think institutions exist in theory to reduce the transaction costs, as just going to Coasean thought. And when the transaction cost goes down sufficiently vis-a-vis an individual's capability and resources, of course, then I think we can move from being more institution dependent to individual dependent. That is one way to think about it. Again, I'm not trying to go against the grain. I mean, one can think of a very different design. But can you hear me, Pat? Am I still coming across?
Yes, you are, Chintan.
Yeah, but see, what I feel is that in our case, with the Atal Innovation Mission, for instance, first of all, you made one statement which I was a little woken up by. You said that we assume that the person is weak, and therefore they need all this help. And I see it slightly differently in that, in fact, I'd like to assume that a person is strong, but that person still has systemic barriers to doing what in their entrepreneurial journey, which would be nice to, if we can do something to lower those systemic barriers, that would be nice. So, in other words, like in the world's most lubricated entrepreneur, the phrase that the innovator can nail it, the ecosystem will scale it. In the less lubricated ecosystems, lot more effort for individual to sort of take their idea to success. And that is where institutions, if designed right, can lower, if designed right, can lower the, did this come through at all? Hello?
Yeah, but
Hello.
it was a little difficult, Chintan, but the sense we got was that there are systemic barriers that institutions can help us or help people overcome. And of course, you said if they are designed right.
That is right.
Yeah.
That is right.
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 Good. Let's move on. We've got about 20 minutes, just about 20 minutes left in the conversation, and I did want to, take cognizance of a few questions that have come in from the audience that has been listening to us very patiently. The first is around risk, and it's a question or a comment by Dr. Joy Deshmukh Ranadiv, who says the entrepreneurs or entrepreneurship hinges around the ability to manage risk. And it's almost by definition that Dr. Deshmukh is making that point. If we were to look at it from a risk management perspective, then what are the challenges, or what can be done to address risk? And if I may add, a thought here to just sort of set the ball rolling in terms of whatever response the panelists would like to give. I think one of the points that has come up in the discussion is that risk management is not something that would happen on a one-to-one basis. No kind of enabling framework could deal with this on a one-to-one basis, and therefore you need the kind of ecosystem that lowers risk for everyone, and makes entrepreneurship, job creation that much more easy. But any quick comments, Anish, Bharvi, Chintan, on that?
I can come in, Pat. See, risk return investment in some ways go together. And there is a relationship between them. And while ecosystem can, obscure and make some of those relationships more in favor of the small and entrepreneurial participant, but some of it we have to live with it. I'll tell you some of the experiences that we have had. And for example, collectivization is one way of pooling risks at a different level, and then you actually get into a different risk category. This we have done with the small enterprise of poultry, which is very volatile on both on the input and output price front, and also on the supply of raw material front. It is one of the most volatile industry that we have in the agro and allied space. So what we did was to pool the risks at a scale where the risks become more manageable. So that is one way of when we work with the small farmers to look at it. The other is some people have started looking at is to reduce on the input and fixed cost side. So for example, a zero budget natural farming and Honorable PM is so it is a innovation. It is a process innovation. And it has we face as society right from climate change and other fronts. But again, there is another way of managing risk is looking at the inputs and the fixed cost in a very innovative manner. So there is a bit of process innovation that is required, and there is a design innovation that is required. Apart from what you said, ecosystem and would play a role in it. And as a livelihood practitioner, I have found the construction of the intervention itself the most critical. And I speak from NGO experience of working in the communities, that I have found to be a very critical ingredient to mitigating risks.
Have you any thoughts? Otherwise, we could go to the next question. Chintan, were you saying something?
I was just going to underscore one thing. The risk mitigation already Anish talked about, but I want us to appreciate one thing, that innovation ecosystem is the avenue through which our nation takes risk in the first place. In other words, other institutions of our nation are all risk averse, if you think about it. Industry is risk averse, government procurement is risk averse, of course, families are risk averse, well, maybe for good reason. And so it is really this ecosystem where at least a good number of young people are able to take risk. So that's just wanted to underscore that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Bharvi, any other thoughts? Otherwise, I will ask for your views on a second question by Mr. Chidambar Nathan, who wants to know why we don't count jobs created within the family by women entrepreneurs, especially post-pandemic, where they've seen when men returned home, they got employed by the women in the family. So on either of those subjects, any quick comments?
Well, I'm going to answer this in a couple of different parts. First is on the risk. I think it's important to understand that risk at different level is different for the stages of entrepreneurship and the growth. So that's first. I think just clubbing everything as one risk is not good for the system. And that's where sometimes size helps, because you can then understand how a certain size of entrepreneur venture can impact the society or not impact. Is there a risk to the commons, if you will? But apart from that, I think every enterprise will face a market risk, irrespective of its size. Whenever it's going to introduce a new product, for example, take Tata Nano, for example, right? So it really, in fact, is about how have you equipped the understanding of risk in the entrepreneur itself. And I think there a lot of work needs to be done, especially in smaller towns and rural area, because that understanding of risk from a finance perspective, from a market perspective, is not there. Secondly, as Chintan was pointing out, there is an innovation ecosystem and which has a high risk kind of a aspect to it, right? And I think it's important in every sector to identify the kind of ventures that need that kind of risk capital and make sure that those operate in a very different scenario altogether. So, if there is an introduction of a new technology shift, or there is an introduction of a new market shift, can those particular set of ventures in those sectors also get the benefit that an innovation ecosystem enterprise gets, right? And therefore, of course, then defining what we consider as innovation. I think the Atal Innovation Mission is pretty broad based in that. So, that's a good start, if you will. But has that understanding come down at the individual level where it gets executed? We really have to see. In terms of, men returning back and women giving jobs, I would always say one thing. I think we have to, as I said before, we have to remove all this understanding that we have about identities that we have associated to entrepreneurs and throw them out of the window. If we truly want to give due justice to every entrepreneur, irrespective of where they come from. Having said that, when you're a female entrepreneur, you have certain system principles that are set against you, which means it's easier for a men to get finance than for you as a woman. If you are from a certain community, if you're from a certain region, I mean, there are systemic things that we need to resolve to make sure that these identities are not associated. But I would go back to a very simple thing. I don't know if you're and everybody, Anishi must have seen, of course. Most rural shops will have 1 rupee sachets of shampoos. Okay. Kevin Care started it in 80s. And in one house, you will see the mother, the daughter, the mother-in-law using different brands even, right? That's how the preference of individualization is in a common Indian. And the market got to it. Today, 78% to 80% of all shampoo sales in India are in a sachet. So all I'm saying is, where is the sachet version of ecosystem intervention, right? Where every entrepreneur, irrespective of where they come from, are able to take what they need in bit size, digest it, use it, and take the next step forward. I think that's where we need to go.
Pat, can I add something here?
Yes, please, of course.
What Bhairavi has said. First, I really want to second something Bhairavi said earlier, that in every industry sector, there will have to be a way for innovation to become mainstream. In other words, innovation to be solving problems that this sector is already not solving. Today, in Atal Innovation Mission's experience, the only sector that has done that successfully in a full cycle recently is the defense sector. They recognize that without innovation, they will not be able to solve certain problems that they have confronted, and they have embraced innovation in terms of creating a platform and all that. It also has a long way to go, but it has begun. So I think this mainstreaming of innovation and customization to each sector is a very important topic. I just wanted to highlight that. You can still hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and one more thing I wanted to say in terms of the bite size, sachet size innovation ecosystem. This is an announcement that I wanted to make, since this is really the right crowd for it. Next week, we are launching the Vernacular Innovation Program, which is designed, at least its aspiration is to decouple the creative expression from the language of transaction. And so I hope you'd look forward to that, and there will be more on it once we announce it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for using this opportunity, because yes, I'm sure this is the audience that would be eager, to take advantage of that, and also, be able to carry forward the message. We have about 10 minutes left. I did want to touch upon one thing, one of the key questions before we get to a round of closing remarks, which was, to, in the first instance, recognize that lots of breakthroughs have been made. There are pockets of innovation, evidence, hard evidence now, in terms of numbers. Kanika had talked about how, if we could create just 5 new businesses in every village, you would, over a 10-year span, actually create 90 million livelihoods in the country. Right. In the Work for Progress program that we've run with partners such as Transforming Rural India over the last 3.5 years now, in just 40 villages in Mirzapur district, over 3 years, there are about 540 new businesses that have been set up, right, in just 40 villages, right? So it's certainly possible, and this is not the only one. I mean, I wasn't trying to use this as an opportunity to, say that we're the only ones that have met with some success. There are hundreds of such examples. So, quick views from the panel in terms of what it will take to replicate success. What are we missing or not doing, because of which the breakthroughs that have been made, even within many of the government's initiatives, such as the SVEP program, or private sector, social entrepreneurs. They've set up businesses that go deep into villages, but somehow while they may be growing, the kind of scaling out or replication is not happening. So, quick thoughts on what we need to do.
So,
in whichever order, please. Yeah.
So, and this is a very interesting thought that Kanika had, and you have reinforced that. But in my mind, this question has always been there. In each village, you had a flour mill, oil presser, and someone, providing that service. So you had those, 6, 7, 8, 10 enterprises. Maybe you would call that a semi-feudal Jajmani system, which as we modernized, we have escaped that. But we have to also see how those systems that existed hitherto have broken into new things, and maybe the new technologies where we was talking about better transport, better connectivity, and addresses some of this. To my mind, and I like to bring in Aliva also, I know on this, she's a practitioner on ground. To my mind, the work that DA, and I had the good fortune of seeing it myself, in some ways it is the mass flourishing that Phelps talks about. And that is all a system play and the culture play there. And some way, if we are able to, kaun banega business. So all this is a culture play and a system play. And if we are able to bring it down to bites, it will work. And there is no alternative other than going on the ground and working with the community. That's how I perceived. Aliva, you would like to build from your experience here?
Yeah, I'll just take probably a minute or so to describe. So I'll come with a more personal experience. I'm married. I'm Odia, married to a Sindhi guy. So, I am not a natural risk taker. I perceive myself, I'm very calculative and, take very calculated decisions in my life. But, my partner, he was born and brought up in a Sindhi family, he has seen like people taking risk at every point of life and is a natural risk taker. So, it is all about the conditioning. I have always seen my parents, going to work, getting a salary at the end of the month. So I was probably conditioned in that manner. But Neeraj had a very, my partner had a very different perspective to life, and he is more, risk taker. So like, Anish touched upon it, that it's more about, grooming. We have never been taught in our schools about entrepreneurship. So why don't we introduce that as a course in the school itself? Why aren't the kids taught that, entrepreneurship is an alternate career pathway? Why don't we see a massive shift around skilling leading to formal employment? Why don't we, tell that, they can be skilling programs leading to entrepreneurship? So yeah, basically it is all about conditioning, grooming, nurturing the young mind so that they know about all these alternate career pathways. And where we again, had touched upon, these counseling missing. So in urban, to some extent, there are peers, there are alumni networks. We have options to reach out and understand. But in rural areas, these are the things that are missing. The counseling ecosystem is missing over there. There are no mentors to provide them. So maybe we can look at all those missing ecosystem and provide them, and then I'm sure we won't really need a lot of government schemes, a lot of funding, and people are just going to realize their own potential, the latent entrepreneurship within them, and come up with various ideas which probably any one of us would have thought about. Yeah, so that's from me. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Aliva. And I really like the way you put it, Anish, that it's a culture play and a systems play. Incidentally, when I was referring to 5 new enterprises every year per village, I wasn't implying, or certainly wasn't the intention to imply, that these are self-contained economies at the village level. We have in one of the Mirzapur villages, for example, there are 2 women who run a battery-powered rickshaw business, which runs all the way into Mirzapur city and takes people across the temple network. There's another lady, Asha Devi, who's become an aggregator of vermicompost producers, and she's found a market.
Track pants.
Beg your pardon, the jacket. Yeah, the jacket and the track pants. Yeah. So
jacket and the track pants.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I caught exactly what you were saying, but the vermicompost story, this now is sold into urban nurseries and baggaged and sold on Amazon as well. It is much more, and I think several of you have referred to that, the verticality of business models is breaking down, right? There are entrepreneurs there who have 3 or 4 different kinds of businesses they do that all hinge on festive occasions. The wedding season for them is really big because one is a caterer, one is a makeup artist, one does tent decorations, and they're all networked now, right? So, the vertical business models are sort of breaking down, and at least we've seen in those localities, it's much more networked now, as has probably always been the case. Local businesses in India have been phenomenally well networked. If I could just offer an opinion, I think it's that the development sector and the government as well has probably not seen or not been able to respond to that kind of a networked arrangement, and have been limited to what we can deliver. Bharvi, you've been waiting patiently.
All of this is music to my ears, so I'm so happy to listen to it. I only have one thing to say. As people who may have a seat at the table to shape the system, we need to listen better.
Mm-hmm.
When we listen better to the ground, then some of our preconceived notions may go out of the window. And like Aliva said, we may think of empowering the people on the ground to chart the course that we earlier thought they couldn't, and prepare the system for that kind of a course to succeed at most. At the same time, when we listen better to the systemic shifts that are happening in the world, then our ability to create systemic risk mitigations for some of the most vulnerable it's like, when a fruit tree is growing in the first 3 years, in Pahar, they cover it with like a little bit of a katta so that it doesn't catch frost.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to make sure that we hear from the systemic shifts and make sure that our entrepreneurs don't catch the frost before it's time for them to, fruit to success. And I think the only request I have to others who are entrepreneurs and who are listening to this, that do not believe that you don't shape the system. Because wherever you are, when you have decided to materialize an idea into a product or a service and found even at least one customer to buy it, even once, the shift has already started. And I think that's where I would like to end. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Don't go away just yet. We might ask you for a final few remarks. Chintan, if I could put you on the spot a little, and hopefully the connection will still work. You would have already seen from the Atal Innovation Mission's vantage point that there are breakthroughs being made, right? There are change makers who are changing the way things are done, and I'm not just talking about products and technologies but processes as well. What from your point of view needs to be done in order for those breakthroughs to gain much more wider traction?
Yeah. So yes, I do see in the last few months, after the second wave settled down a bit, my focus has been to go on the ground and spend time with people, that's innovators, various other stakeholders who are contributing to how the journeys of these innovators is progressing. And at one level, one can say that there's a lot of effervescence. We
every day I have a lot of good news to hear in terms of people doing interesting things. For example, there were these 5 kids from 5 different parts of our country who were all ATL, Atal Tinkering Lab students. And they came together in a few competitions. And ultimately, more recently, after they moved on from schools and are now in their first year of college, they've built a solution called SAF Water, which is a water quality detection solution, which has generic sensors, but it has a very sophisticated algorithms that they wrote on top of it. And they went on to win the IBM's Code for Change challenge, which is about $200,000. First Indian team to win it. And from 5 different parts of the country coming together. And also it's very, very interesting to see that such things are happening. For me, I think this, the replication question, I have to say, I haven't yet arrived at least at a formula for it. There are several models that one can study. For example, Amul was replicated when it became NDDB, you know. So it went up and then got replicated, for instance. That's one method of replication. If I look at Atal Tinkering Labs, what I'm seeing is that there was one very fascinating example of the Bangalore's Air Force School in Hebbal. Their students created a program called Tinker Champs. It's a club where they teach other students how to make things and so on. And that club has taken roots now in several schools all across India where people are running with the same template. What is fascinating is that many of these kids have put together programs to teach their teachers about technologies. So it is really very interesting that sort of type of empowerment is happening. Now, is it happening all across? Not really. And there again, one has to be a little careful also as to not to thrust their own strong opinions on people, onto people, in the sense that there is a little bit of a self-selection going on in terms of who wants to do what. And so we're in that sense, again, we're walking this fine line of what one wants to do or top down in terms of replicating things versus what one wants to what one wants to let it happen bottom up in a more organic fashion. That fine line is really for me the real question. This whole idea of 5 entrepreneurs a village also is, again, the moment you say that, I think what is interesting is that you'll give somebody a yardstick and say, okay, let me create 5. But then what have those 5 done to, for the ecosystem further and all that? So these are that's how I see it. But again, I really have to say no silver bullet from my side in terms of replication. Lots of ours that there's a battery of sort of approaches, but again, no single approach that at least I have converged upon.
Thank you. And maybe it's a wrong question to ask, or a wrong expectation that things will get replicated. I was somehow, as you were all speaking, reminded of a book by V.S. Naipaul. I think either the title or somewhere in the book it says "A Million Mutinies Now." Yeah. And the nature of each mutiny might be different. It's not that we have to create one model and then spread it all across the country. Wonderful. We've actually come to the end of the conversation. Probably have something like 90 seconds or so to go. And I'd like to make sure that we don't get cut off or run out of time totally. So I would want to, at this stage, thank all of you, Bhairavi, Anish, Chintan, Aliva, and the participants who've listened to us, sent in a few questions. But in the time also, thank you very, very much. In the time that we have left, any final thoughts, concluding remarks that the panelists might have? Takeaways for all of us. Again, in whichever order you'd like to go.
All right, I'll go first.
Please, Bhairavi.
I think I already said it. We need to listen better. We need to empower people with decision-making capabilities. And we need to believe that the size, the scale, the market, the product, the industry, the sector they choose, they've chosen in the best of their knowledge. And we must not thrust our ideas of scale or success on them. And I think that all comes when you listen better.
Thank you. Thanks. Anish? Chintan?
Okay, so well, first of all, thank you, Pat.
You know, some
Yeah.
So, looks like there's a delay here. So, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, Pat. It's always wonderful to learn from the work of development alternatives. And today I've also gotten a chance to meet a few people you work with. I think we've said what we wanted to say, so I don't again have a single thing that I could offer to people, but I would say that personally, I feel that many of these things that we are aspiring to seem doable if we can work together.
Wonderful. Thanks. Anish?
with what Bhairavi and Chintan said, both together important. I'll just add one, without that, it feeds on ground. So let's, so that is something that, one message, if we could carry forward and start engaging on ground on these issues, we'll see the of enterprises.
Thank you, Anish. I'd like to thank you all once again. I can see some of the people from our next panel are already here. Good afternoon, RP. Good to see you. Yeah, we'll just take another 30 seconds. I found it quite fascinating, how having started the discussion with the hope that we'd come to, straightforward solutions or prescriptions in terms of, what the future of micro entrepreneurship in the country should look like. I think all of you, our panelists, took us back to, underlying values, principles, processes, back to the basics of what we have to get right for any kind of entrepreneurship to flourish. So thank you all panelists for that. And with those words, I'd like to close this session and continue into the next, which hopefully all of you would stay back for. It's a session that now looks not so much at entrepreneurship from an individual point of view, but more at collectives and clusters and what difference they can make in terms of our ability to bring livelihood security into people's lives. So thank you very much. Over to you, Parul, or straight to Kanika, I guess, who will introduce our next moderator and the panel. Thank you, everyone.